Looking at this map of Europe in 1914, the continent's major powers had locked themselves into two rival alliances. On one side, the Triple Entente, France, Britain, and Russia. On the other, the Triple Alliance, led by Germany and Austria-Hungary. Germany, rising in strength, feared being encircled by its rivals, while Austria-Hungary clung to a fragile, aging empire. The tensions snapped on June 28 in Sarajevo. A 19-year-old Slav nationalist assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. Austria-Hungary immediately blamed its Balkan rival, Serbia, and issued an ultimatum demanding humiliating concessions. When Serbia refused, Austria-Hungary declared war and began shelling Belgrade. Feeling honor-bound to defend a fellow Slav nation, Russian Tsar Nicholas II ordered his army to mobilize. German Emperor Wilhelm II, having promised support to Austro-Hungary, saw a conflict with Russia as inevitable and used the Russian mobilization to justify declaring war on them. Because of the rigid web of European treaties, a localized dispute in the Balkans didn't stay localized. Germany knew war with Russia meant war with Russia's ally, France. Within days, millions of men were marching across the continent. Facing a war on two fronts, Germany relied on the Schlieffen Plan. The strategy was to advance rapidly through neutral Belgium, encircle the French armies near Paris, and force a quick surrender before the massive Russian army in the east could fully mobilize. But invading Belgium violated a neutrality pact guaranteed by Britain, pulling the British Expeditionary Force into the conflict. French and British forces finally made their stand at the River Marne, just 40 miles outside Paris. Their desperate counterattack saved the city and halted the German advance, costing 250,000 casualties on both sides. Unable to break through, both sides tried to outflank each other to the north in a maneuver known as the Race to the Sea. When that failed, the exhausted armies dug in. They carved out a continuous 350-mile defensive line, stretching from the English Channel to Switzerland, seeking shelter from deadly machine gun fire and artillery shells. The initial belief that the fighting would be a short, glorious adventure evaporated. The continent was now locked into the brutal, static reality of trench warfare. At sea, Britain leveraged its massive navy to impose a strict blockade on Germany, cutting off food and vital supplies. Germany retaliated with a lethal new weapon, the U-boat. These submarines patrolled the waters around the British Isles, attacking merchant ships without warning. In May 1915, a U-boat torpedoed the British passenger liner Lusitania, killing nearly 1,200 people, including 128 Americans. The conflict quickly spilled beyond Europe's borders. The Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers, opening brutal new fronts against Russia in the freezing Caucasus Mountains and against British forces in the Middle East. Simultaneously, fighting erupted across European colonies in Africa and Asia. Back on the Western Front, commanders grew desperate to break the stalemate of the trenches. At the Second Battle of Ypres, German forces unleashed a lethal cloud of chlorine gas, forcing Allied troops to abandon their positions. It marked the terrifying debut of chemical weapons on the battlefield. With traditional military maneuvers failing to secure a victory, the combatants expanded their targets. They sank civilian ships, mobilized colonial populations, and weaponized chemistry, stripping away the old rules of engagement. By 1916, tactics shifted. The primary goal was no longer capturing territory. Both sides embraced a strategy of attrition, deliberately grinding down the enemy's manpower and resources, inflicting such enormous losses that the other side would simply be forced to surrender. Germany unleashed a devastating assault on the symbolic French fortress town of Verdun, with the explicit plan to bleed France white in its defense. The French held the line, but at the cost of 365,000 casualties. To relieve the pressure, Britain and France launched their own massive offensive at the Somme, where British infantry were cut down by the tens of thousands in a matter of hours. Amid the slaughter of the Somme, the British introduced a desperate mechanical innovation, the tank. These early, cumbersome machines were designed to roll over barbed wire and absorb machine gun fire, hoping to finally punch a hole through the defensive lines. Combat had become an industrialized process. Factories produced artillery shells by the millions, feeding a mechanical mincing machine where hundreds of thousands of men died to gain just a few miles of mud. Knowing they would lose a long war of attrition against the resource-rich Allies, German leaders gambled. They resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, hoping to starve Britain into submission within 6 months. But these shoot-on-sight tactics meant targeting American ships, pushing U.S. President Woodrow Wilson to declare war on Germany. While America prepared to mobilize, the Russian Empire fractured. Enormous casualties and severe food shortages triggered riots and a massive revolution. The Tsar abdicated, and a second uprising brought Vladimir Lenin's Bolshevik Party to power. Lenin immediately signed an armistice with the Central Powers, eliminating the Eastern Front entirely. The remaining Allies were near a breaking point. Whole units of the French army began to mutiny, refusing to participate in further suicidal attacks. Meanwhile, British forces battered themselves against German defenses in the relentless rain and broken irrigation channels of Passchendaele, suffering nearly 250,000 casualties. The year 1917 created a shrinking window of opportunity. The Central Powers had knocked Russia out of the fight, freeing up massive numbers of troops. Now they had to secure a total victory in the West before the vast industrial and demographic resources of the United States could cross the Atlantic. In the spring of 1918, German General Erich Ludendorff launched one last massive onslaught. Using 500,000 troops freed from the east, German stormtroopers overwhelmed the British lines, pushing deep into Allied territory to win the war before the Americans could arrive. But the advance stretched German supply lines to the breaking point, and the offensive stalled at the River Marne. Just as the German army exhausted itself, fresh American divisions entered the line. With 10,000 U.S. soldiers arriving every day, the Allies launched their 100 Days Offensive, pushing the German forces into full retreat. The Central Powers rapidly disintegrated. Under relentless Allied pressure, the overstretched Bulgarian army collapsed, followed quickly by the Ottoman Empire and Austro-Hungary. Facing total military failure and a spreading revolution at home, Kaiser Wilhelm abdicated, and a German republic was proclaimed. Germany's military tactics were ultimately overwhelmed by the sheer industrial and manpower superiority of a global coalition. On November 11, 1918, a German delegation signed an armistice, bringing the combat to a close. The subsequent Paris Peace Conference imposed severe conditions on the defeated nations. Under the Treaty of Versailles, Germany's military was strictly limited. The nation was forced to pay heavy war reparations, lose colonial territories, and accept full responsibility for the conflict in a humiliating war guilt clause. This map shows the geopolitical restructuring of the globe. The ancient Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires were erased completely. In their place, the victors carved out new borders, creating states like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and dismantling the Middle East. The human cost was staggering. 9.5 million soldiers perished, 1 in 8 of those who fought. 7 million civilians lost their lives, and vast stretches of Europe were left completely devastated. The armistice ended the immediate bloodshed, but it did not resolve the underlying tensions. The punitive economic terms and newly drawn borders left a deep, lingering resentment, setting the stage for a much larger conflict just 2 decades later.